The 1948 Arab-Israeli War ended with a ceasefire, but not with peace. The UN partition plan had proposed dividing Palestine into a Jewish state, 56.5%, an Arab state, 43%, and an international zone for Jerusalem. But after the war, the map looked very different. Israel controlled about 78% of the former British mandate. Jordan annexed the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip. The proposed Arab state never materialized. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared independence. The United States granted de facto recognition the same day, followed by the Soviet Union with de jure recognition. After two failed attempts, Israel was admitted to the United Nations on May 11, 1949. However, UN membership does not require universal diplomatic recognition, and many countries continue to reject Israel's legitimacy. As of mid-2024, Israel is recognized by 164 of the 193 UN member states. That means 29 countries still do not recognize Israel, including several in the Arab and Muslim world such as Algeria, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Pakistan, as well as others like North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba. Some of these states have never recognized Israel. Others once did, but severed ties due to conflict or political shifts. For Palestinians and many Arab nations, recognition remains tied to resolving the core issues of the conflict, especially the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for refugees, and the establishment of a Palestinian state. By the end of the 1948 war, around 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. Most became refugees in neighboring Arab countries, but about 150,000 remained inside the new state of Israel, making up roughly 15% of Israel's population at the time. Though granted citizenship, they lived under military rule until 1966, faced widespread land confiscation, and were politically marginalized. In Jordan, over 300,000 refugees arrived. Most were granted citizenship, and by the late 1960s, Palestinians made up 50 to 60% of the population, reshaping the kingdom's political balance. In Lebanon, the refugee population grew to around 270,000, comprising 6 to 10% of the total population. Denied citizenship and excluded from many professions, their presence strained Lebanon's sectarian system and laid the groundwork for future instability. Syria accepted about 90,000 refugees, offering access to services but not full citizenship. In Gaza, under Egyptian control, refugees lived under tight restrictions and without national rights. Across the region, the refugee crisis didn't just redraw borders, it redefined politics. In September 1948, amid the chaos of war, Egypt supported the creation of the All-Palestine Government in Gaza, an entity confirmed by the Arab League and recognized by 6 of its 7 member states, with Transjordan notably refusing. The government, based in Gaza City, claimed sovereignty over all of Palestine and was presented as the legitimate national authority. It is regarded by some historians as the first serious attempt to establish an independent Palestinian state, though in reality it functioned under Egyptian protection, often described as an all-Palestine protectorate. Meanwhile, King Abdullah I of Transjordan rejected this initiative and began consolidating control over the West Bank, which his Arab legion had captured. In December 1948, the Jericho Conference, attended by pro-Hashemite Palestinian figures, declared him King of Arab Palestine and called for the union of the West Bank with Transjordan. While the Arab League opposed this annexation, Abdullah's move ultimately prevailed, marking a significant step in his bid to speak for the Palestinians and deepening the rivalry over Palestinian representation. In the early 1950s, Palestinian fedayeen, guerrilla fighters, began launching cross-border raids into Israel from Gaza, Jordan, and Syria. Many were refugees seeking to reclaim lost homes or resist Israeli control. Their actions were deeply controversial, seen as freedom fighters by Palestinians and much of the Arab world, but labeled terrorists by Israel and its allies. The Gaza Strip, the only territory of the All-Palestine Protectorate, became the epicenter of fedayeen activity. Backed primarily by Egypt, these fighters targeted Israeli settlements and infrastructure, prompting harsh reprisal operations by Israeli forces, often extending into neighboring countries. Ideologically, many fedayeen groups embraced left-wing, socialist, or communist ideals, drawing inspiration from anti-colonial movements in Algeria, Vietnam, and Latin America. This alignment placed them squarely in the Soviet sphere of influence, complicating regional dynamics during the Cold War and reinforcing U.S. support for Israel as a strategic ally. In 1952, a group of young military officers known as the Free Officers Movement overthrew Egypt's monarchy. Among them was Gamal Abdel Nasser, who quickly rose to power and reshaped Egypt's political future. Charismatic and deeply anti-colonial, Nasser positioned himself as the face of a new Arab nationalism rooted in dignity, unity, and resistance to foreign domination. He emerged as the region's loudest voice against imperialism and Zionism, inspiring revolutions and reshaping alliances. In 1958, Egypt and Syria merged to form the United Arab Republic, a bold, though short-lived, experiment in pan-Arab unity. While the UAR dissolved in 1961, Nasser's message endured. Under his leadership, Egypt became a key patron of the Palestinian cause, training fedayeen and broadcasting the call for liberation to the Arab world. In July 1956, Egyptian President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, previously controlled by British and French interests. In response, Israel, Britain, and France struck a secret agreement. Israel would invade Sinai, giving Britain and France a pretext to intervene under the guise of separating the warring sides. In late October, Israeli forces stormed into the Sinai Peninsula, quickly routing Egyptian troops and reaching the canal. But the plan collapsed under intense pressure from both the United States and the Soviet Union, who feared escalation in a Cold War flashpoint. All three invading powers were forced to withdraw. To stabilize the situation, the United Nations deployed its first-ever peacekeeping force, the United Nations Emergency Force, UNEF, tasked with supervising the withdrawal and acting as a buffer between Egyptian and Israeli forces. It was a landmark moment in UN history, setting the precedent for future peacekeeping missions. Though Egypt lost militarily, Nasser emerged as a political hero across the Arab world. Israel gained access to the Straits of Tiran and demonstrated its growing military reach, while the crisis marked a turning point in the decline of British and French colonial influence in the region. As regional tensions escalated in the 1960s, a new political force emerged, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. Founded in 1964 under the auspices of the Arab League, the PLO was created to unify various Palestinian factions and represent the Palestinian people. Its first chairman, Ahmad Shakiri, led a structure that included the Palestine National Council, an executive committee, and affiliated armed groups. Ideologically, the PLO embraced Palestinian nationalism, Arab socialism, and armed struggle as the path to liberation, placing it firmly in the leftist, anti-imperialist camp of the Cold War era. Though initially seen by some as a tool of Arab regimes, the PLO quickly gained traction among Palestinians. After the 1967 war, it would evolve into the central symbol of Palestinian identity and resistance. In 1974, both the Arab League and the United Nations recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Meanwhile, on the ground, the situation was deteriorating. Palestinian guerrilla raids, Israeli reprisals, and Syrian-Israeli clashes in the Golan Heights pushed the region toward war. In May 1967, Nasser expelled UN peacekeepers from Sinai and closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, an act Israel viewed as a direct threat. Arab states mobilized. War was no longer a question of if, but when. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive air strike against Egypt, destroying most of its air force on the ground within hours. Israeli intelligence had assessed that a coordinated Arab attack was imminent. Based on Egyptian troop concentrations in Sinai, the closure of the Straits of Tiran, a vital shipping route, and a Soviet-backed military buildup in Syria. Jordan and Syria joined the war later that day. Perceiving an existential threat, Israel struck first to gain the upper hand. In just 6 days, Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights, expanding its territory from around 20,000 square kilometers to nearly 90,000 square kilometers. It now controlled all of historical Palestine and additional territory in Egypt and Syria. The war triggered a second wave of displacement. Approximately 300,000 Palestinians fled or were displaced, many for the second time since 1948. Over 100,000 Syrians fled the Golan Heights, and tens of thousands of Egyptians and Jordanians were uprooted from the Sinai and West Bank. In the aftermath, Israel began establishing settlements in the newly occupied territories, initially under military pretexts, but increasingly driven by ideological and strategic motives. These settlements, illegal under international law, would become a central obstacle to future peace efforts. In June 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem from Jordan, including the Old City, home to the Western Wall, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. For many Israelis, it was a moment of spiritual and national fulfillment. Soldiers famously wept at the Western Wall. Soon after, Israel extended its laws and administration to East Jerusalem, and in 1980, passed the Jerusalem Law, declaring the entire city its unified capital. The move was condemned internationally. UN Security Council Resolution 242 had already called for Israeli withdrawal from territories occupied in the war, affirming the principle of the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force. In 1980, Resolution 478 declared the annexation of East Jerusalem null and void. The international community, including the United Nations, continues to regard East Jerusalem as occupied territory and does not recognize Israeli sovereignty there. For Palestinians, the annexation marked the loss of what they consider their future capital. Jerusalem became a powerful symbol of two deeply entrenched and opposing national narratives, one of return and redemption, the other of dispossession and denial. After the Arab defeat in 1967, the Palestinian national movement fractured into rival factions under the PLO. Fatah embraced guerrilla tactics, while new Marxist groups pushed for global impact. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, led by George Habash, mixed Marxist-Leninist ideology with dramatic operations like airline hijackings. The DFLP, under Naif Hawatma, focused on socialism and mass mobilization. The PFLP, General Command, backed by Syria, prioritized military action over politics. These acts weren't isolated. Palestinian militancy mirrored a global surge of radical movements. Groups like the IRA, ETA, FARC, and Badr Meinhof also embraced armed struggle. The PFLP became both a partner and model. Some European radicals even trained in Palestinian camps, forming a revolutionary network that blurred the lines between national resistance and global insurgency. The most infamous moment came in 1972, when the Black September organization, a Fatah-linked splinter, attacked the Munich Olympics. 11 Israeli athletes were killed after a failed German rescue. For some Palestinians, it symbolized a desperate cry for recognition. For most of the world, it was terrorism. In response, Israel launched Operation Wrath of God, a covert campaign to assassinate those responsible. The Palestinian struggle had gone global and far more combustible. By 1970, the PLO had grown into a quasi-state within Jordan, operating armed militias, taxing refugees, and launching cross-border attacks into Israel. The tipping point came when the PFLP hijacked multiple airliners, landing them in Jordan and detonating them in front of international media. King Hussein, fearing a coup and foreign intervention, ordered a massive military crackdown. In what became known as Black September, thousands of Palestinians were killed or expelled. Armed resistance was crushed, and the PLO leadership fled, first to Syria, then to Lebanon. Syria's brief intervention failed, and the Arab League brokered an uneasy calm. In exile once again, the PLO found a new base in Lebanon, where the Cairo Agreement granted them autonomy to operate within refugee camps and along the southern border. While this offered renewed freedom to organize and resist, it would soon embroil the Palestinian movement in Lebanon's own fragile sectarian politics, and in a new and bloody conflict to come. After the sudden death of Gamal Abdel Nasser in 1970, Egypt's leadership passed to Anwar Sadat, a figure many underestimated. Quietly, Sadat began to reshape Egypt's strategy. He moved away from Soviet dominance, expelled advisors in 1972, and sought to break the deadlock with Israel, not through negotiation, but through force. On October 6, 1973, during Yom Kippur and the holy month of Ramadan, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise assault against Israeli forces in Sinai and the Golan Heights. Egyptian troops crossed the Suez Canal, breaching Israel's Bar-Lev line, while Syrian forces advanced on the Golan. Israel, initially stunned, counterattacked with help from a massive U.S. airlift. The Soviet Union supported its Arab allies. The war ended in a UN-brokered ceasefire, but it marked a psychological turning point. Israel's aura of invincibility had been shattered, and Sadat emerged with newfound leverage. What followed was a geopolitical shockwave. In response to Western support for Israel, Arab oil producers imposed an embargo, slashing exports to the U.S., Netherlands, and other allies. Oil prices quadrupled, triggering the first global energy crisis, fuel shortages, inflation, and a global recession. For the first time, petroleum had become a weapon, and the world could no longer ignore the Arab side of the conflict. After the October War, Anwar Sadat concluded that Egypt's future lay not in endless conflict, but in diplomacy. Having expelled Soviet advisors and shifted toward the West, he made a historic move. In 1977, he traveled to Jerusalem, becoming the first Arab leader to address the Israeli Knesset. His goal was clear: recover Sinai and end the cycle of war. In 1978, U.S. President Jimmy Carter brought Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to Camp David. After 13 tense days, they signed the Camp David Accords, followed by the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. Egypt regained the Sinai Peninsula, and in return, became the first Arab country to officially recognize Israel. The deal came with significant rewards. Egypt began receiving over $2 billion annually in U.S. aid, including $1.3 billion in military assistance, second only to Israel. This support modernized Egypt's armed forces, opened access to U.S. markets, and cemented Cairo's strategic partnership with Washington. Egypt also granted the U.S. priority access to the Suez Canal and airspace, deepening its role as a regional power broker. But the cost was steep. Egypt was suspended from the Arab League, and Sadat was branded a traitor by many in the Arab world. On October 6, 1981, during a military parade commemorating the 1973 war, Sadat was assassinated by Islamist militants from Egyptian Islamic Jihad, furious over the peace with Israel and his crackdown on dissent. His death underscored the risks of breaking with regional orthodoxy and the fragility of peace in a region still on edge. Lebanon's political system was built on a fragile sectarian balance. The 1943 National Pact divided power among Maronite Christians, Sunni Muslims, and Shia Muslims, assigning top state roles along confessional lines. But beneath this formula, deep inequalities festered, especially among the Shia population in the south, long neglected and underrepresented. After being expelled from Jordan in the early 1970s, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, established a stronghold in Lebanon, operating almost as a state within a state. Tensions between Palestinian fighters and Christian militias escalated, and in 1975, Lebanon descended into a brutal civil war. As the PLO launched attacks into northern Israel and Israel retaliated with airstrikes, the southern border became a militarized war zone. In June 1982, following an assassination attempt on Israel's ambassador in London, carried out by the Abu Nidal organization, but blamed politically on the PLO, Israel launched Operation Peace for Galilee. Its stated aims: expel the PLO, secure the northern border, and install a friendly Christian-led government in Beirut. Israeli forces invaded southern Lebanon, allied with the Falangist militias, and besieged Beirut for weeks. Under a U.S.-brokered deal, Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO since 1969, and thousands of fighters were evacuated to Tunisia. But the occupation had unintended consequences. In the Shia heartlands of southern Lebanon, a new force emerged, Hezbollah. Backed by Iran and inspired by the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Hezbollah cast itself as the armed resistance of Lebanon's Shia community. Unlike most militias, it refused to disarm, claiming a mandate to fight Israeli occupation. Over time, it would grow into one of the most powerful actors in Lebanon's fractured political and military landscape. From the ruins of war, the Middle East entered an era of fracture and realignment. The Palestinian movement was dispersed. Lebanon fell into chaos. Egypt made peace and paid the price. Israel eliminated threats, but created new enemies. And across the region, ideologies hardened while alliances shifted. By 1982, diplomacy had begun, but the ground was still shaking. The next chapter will not begin with armies, but with fire in the streets and stones in children's hands.